We have made it to the offseason here in year number 3 at the Kansas Dynasty here on EA College Football 25. And we've got a whole lot to go over in today's episode, so buckle up. You are not going to want to miss any of it. We're going to recap the season real quick. We're going to go through the NFL draft process, the transfer portal, National Signing Day, training results, and we're going to see some big changes to the conferences across the country. Last episode, we wrapped up the college football playoff with Notre Dame winning the national championship over Maryland. The final score looks close, but the game was not. The Irish led 42-7 going into the fourth quarter with Jay Pitts, the redshirt freshman quarterback and former Kansas recruiting target, winning the college football playoff MVP. The young man put on an absolute show against the Terps and really in all 3 games. As for Maryland, MJ Morris did not have the best of days. Still an outstanding playoff run for him, upping his draft stock, but how much higher is it going to really go? He is 25 years old, or at least he will be when he makes his NFL debut. An impressive outing for Pitts, who had an outstanding freshman season, and he looks like a guy who certainly will be at the top of mock drafts going into next season, where he will be draft eligible after throwing 51 touchdowns. The question with him is, how much is he going to get better? His ratings are pretty peaked to where they are, but if 4,700 yards, 51 touchdowns, and a national championship is the peak, then I'm sure Notre Dame will not be too upset with this result. So if he has another strong season like this, I would expect he enters the draft and is eventually a first-round draft pick. Before we get into the offseason, though, I do quickly want to go over our team stats in a little bit more detail. We didn't really do this earlier in the season. We just went over them quickly. I'm also going to quickly scroll through the bowl results. We showed most of these previously, but here's another look at them, I suppose. Kansas State hilariously losing to Nebraska. As it turns out, they did not deserve to grab a playoff spot over us. But as we look at our final season and are now able to reflect with a record of 9-4, it really was a very successful season for us. It felt like we overachieved considering the expectations coming into this season. We won 8 games last year, but we were one of the youngest teams in the country. So to finish this year with 9 wins, a playoff berth, nearly a playoff win, we had the ball and we're up with less than 2 minutes left, and the number 10 spot in the AP poll to finish out the year, it's hard to complain with that result. So we don't end up moving down despite the playoff loss, which, I mean, how many teams are really going to move above us? Maybe Florida, since they had a pretty strong showing against the Maryland team who made the national championship. But nonetheless, I feel like this season was a massive success for us, and there's a lot of reasons to be excited considering much of our roster core is going to be back, something that we didn't really get to say in either seasons 1 or 2. The big question, though, will be the long-term future at the quarterback position, because as we know with Clyde Poole, he has hit his peak. He will not be getting any better. And the question is what Clyde Poole is giving us right now good enough? Can Clyde Poole take this team on a playoff run like Jalen Daniels did back in year 1? Poole's passing stats stayed pretty much the same from last year. Obviously, we know he's one of the top rushers in the country, and I think the big difference is the fumbles, going down from 10 to 3. That was a big talking point coming into the year. But he had his worst game against Michigan. He completed less than 50% of his passes. He had 5 sacks, and for the first time really in his entire career, he was a negative on the ground. Granted, the offensive line was absolutely horrific. It really wasn't his fault, but he was not able to elevate us with the poor circumstances, and I'm curious to see if any of the young quarterbacks on the roster can surpass him in rating. We can't forget, though, that he's one of the most accomplished rushers in the country and has only played 2 seasons. Over 2,000 career rushing yards. Going into next year, he will be second amongst active college football players in terms of rushing, only behind Ricky Hunt Jr. of Ohio. In terms of rushing touchdowns, he's 4th, only behind Darius Taylor, first-round pick. Jeremiah Love could be a first-rounder. Dante Dowdell, RB1 in this class. And then LJ Martin, who's an NFL prospect in his own right. That's some good company to be grouped with. He also has the most fumbles with 13, but considering how much that number went down from his freshman season to this year, there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic that the ball security on the ground will continue to improve. He's 3rd in rushing yards per game at over 81. So even though he has his deficiencies as a passer and will never be great throwing the football, we also have to remember how good of a rusher he is. I think Kerry Chosen and Sean Pollard are both pretty mobile, but they're not Clyde Poole. So we have to keep all things in mind there. He's an elite runner, but the ceiling as a passer is certainly lowered with Clyde Poole under center. Of course, we've got a good group of backs on the team. Ty Lord and Cornell Teamer wrapping up their true freshman seasons. They were amongst the most efficient backs in the country. Granted, I think they both had a few really long runs that really inflated their averages, but still, we've got these guys probably for the next 3 years. A lot of reasons to be excited about this backfield. We saw the running back rotation of 5 diminish throughout the year, and then in the playoff game, it was really just Lord, Teamer, and Jazir Tolbert. Through the air, again, very young group here. Monty Law gave us some great flashes. Isaiah Lamore, somehow a first-team All-American. I'm not really sure how he got that spot, but he still had a good year. Mario Maddox, I think, could be in line for another big offseason. And then Rajon Jones. I thought he was a little inconsistent, but he made some big plays when he needed to, and I'm definitely hoping he can be a more consistent part of the offense next year. The offensive line had its ups and downs. I think the sack numbers, again, are a little bit inflated. That's just Clyde Poole's play style, and I don't think Spencer Fano was that bad, per se. I do want to talk about the guards, though. James Livingston and Amir Herring, because those two single-handedly lost us the game against Michigan. Herring had 3 or 4 really bad holding calls, and then James Livingston, who did not allow a single sack in the regular season, let up 4 against Michigan. Defensively, certainly up and down. The offense was definitely the more consistent area of our team. I feel like our defense was the Clyde Poole of defenses in the sense that there's a lot of big plays, a lot of TFLs, a lot of sacks, a lot of turnovers, but it's just not consistent on a play-to-play basis. Nonetheless, we had a great season from Travion Ford, the senior, likely to be a first-rounder after 12.5 sacks. Dekias Brinkley, the all-time leader in terms of Kansas history in sacks. Unclear whether he will enter the NFL or not. But regardless if he goes pro or not, there's going to be more guys we call upon going after the quarterback. Devin Murphy had 7 sacks in 9 games this year as a freshman. I'm really excited about his future. Champ Tompkins had 6 as a rotational guy. Seth Jennings only had 3. Jennings has not lived up to his recruiting status, in my opinion, through his first 2 seasons, and we're going to need him to be more consistent next year. In the secondary, we tied Arizona State for the most interceptions in the country. We are losing Caleb Purdy and Brian Dilworth. We're going to be relying on some young corners, specifically Quantavius Landers, to be more consistent. Landers, the 5-star, had some good moments this year, but he also was the one who had the busted coverage towards the end of the Michigan game, and if not for that play, there's a good chance we would have won and gotten to play against Notre Dame. Anthony Escalante improved a lot this season. Certainly not perfect, but I'm excited to have him back. And then we will have a new punter, as Damon Greaves, who's been the starter there over the last 3 years, will be graduating. Here's a look at the stats across the entirety of the country. I do find it interesting that the 4 quarterbacks who played for the final 4 teams are 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in terms of passing yards. It does make sense, though. They all got to play extra games, and they were all good enough to lead their teams to the semifinals, so it makes sense. Only one of them, MJ Morris, is a senior, so we'll get to see a lot of the top teams' quarterbacks back in action. Jay Pitts and Sam Onatulu led in touchdowns. It's crazy that both of those guys are freshmen, and they both threw for over 50 scores. Got to imagine Onatulu as well will be towards the top of mock drafts next season. As for the interceptions, there you go. And then in terms of passer rating, the highest amongst actual starters was Corin LaRoque of South Carolina, a guy who has played well above his rating over the last couple of years. Dylan Raiola, quietly, I feel like has been really good in this series. He'll be a favorite to go in next year's draft pretty early. And then, of course, Dante Moore, QB1 in this year's class. DJ Lagway as well was 2nd in QBR. If he declares for the draft, I think he could be a first-rounder. If he stays, I think Florida's one of the favorites to win the whole thing. Those are your rushing leaders. Clyde Poole nearly led in rushing touchdowns. He had 14. Dante Dowdell led the way with 15, and again, he is going to be one of the highest drafted running backs in recent memory. I'm really surprised to see Xavier Jordan 3rd in receptions because it felt like throughout the year USC was not giving him the ball enough. I guess because he had 9 in the game against Maryland, that's how that happens. But he finishes only behind Braylon Wisłowski and Jaden Greathouse. Greathouse is a guy whose draft stock went way up over the playoff. He was unbelievably good. And then Wisłowski also led in terms of yards. He also had 22 touchdowns. It's crazy that Nick Harbor is going to be the higher drafted at the 2, but he's got the physical intangibles, and he wasn't too far behind with 1,200 yards of his own. Towards the back end of the 1,000 list, we've got guys like Perry Thompson and Jeremiah Smith, two players expected to declare for the draft and likely go in the first round. Xavier Jordan, the Heisman winner, at 24 touchdowns, followed by Braden Wisłowski, who had 22. Nick Harbor not too far behind at 15. We may never see something like that Maryland offense again. Those guys put on a show. It says the most sacks allowed by an offensive lineman was 15, but that's not true. It's actually 25, allowed by Jonathan Hutchins of Houston, including a game early in the year where he let up 8 against Utah. That is insane. Only 2 games he did not allow a sack, and of course one of them was against us. That is embarrassing. We did win 41-7 though, so we can't be too upset. But against Utah, Caleb McMichael was sacked 9 times, 8 of which were let up by Hutchins. Keanu Tanuvasa had 4. He's probably going to be a first rounder. And then Sione Fotu also had 4. As for defense, Malik Bryant led in tackles. We've got to do sacks and interceptions by conference. Tevarua Tafiti had 18.5 for Stanford. That is a lot. Kendall Brown led the AAC. Travion Ford led the Big 12. Love to see it. CJ Madden led all players with 21. What a season for him. He's going to be a high draft pick. He is a little bit undersized, but very, very talented. The Big 12 had all the big sack getters this year, it felt like, while some conferences didn't even have anybody in the double digits. The SEC had a handful of guys, but not as good as the Big 10. And then in terms of interceptions, the overall leader, I believe, had 8, that being D'Angelo Pons of Indiana. The Arizona State duo had 7. We had a couple guys not too far behind with 6, but I'm pretty sure it was Pons of Indiana who's going to be a pretty high draft pick in this year's class, probably a day 2 selection. Indiana's got a couple really good defensive backs in this class. There's Malik Muhammad of Texas, probably the first defensive player to be drafted. And then in terms of kicking, Escalante, in terms of field goals made and efficiency, is pretty close to the middle, which, considering where he was as a freshman, is a noticeable improvement. He had some long kicks as well, a few attempts from 50, a few makes from 50, and he finished pretty high in terms of extra points. Damon Greaves was towards the bottom of the list in terms of punting. That's because we didn't punt as much as everybody else because we had one of the higher scoring offenses in the nation. So now that gets us set for the offseason. And as I mentioned, throughout the entirety of this season, it's going to be exciting for us because unlike the last 2 years, we're not an upperclassman and senior-driven team. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to be losing some guys, but we only have a handful of starters going. Caleb Purdy, Travion Ford, Brian Dilworth, Spencer Fano, even Damon Greaves, all big losses, but we only have 9 seniors on the roster. Much of this team is comprised of freshmen and sophomores who hopefully will be back. With us building so many freshmen and sophomores on the roster, though, there's not going to be room for everybody to play. And while guys can enter the transfer portal as they wish, I don't think enough players in this game, especially from good teams, choose to transfer. So I'm going to be taking matters into my own hands and doing something a little bit unique for the challenge. So basically what I'm going to do is I will manually put some of our players who I don't think have a clear role for us going forward into the transfer portal. That way, they'll get an opportunity to play elsewhere. For those of you who are wondering how to manually put your own players in the portal, this is how you do it. First, I would simulate to the players leaving stage. I did not, so I had to redo all of this, but make sure you go to the players leaving stage before you do any of this. From there, you're going to want to make a coach on a new team. It can be anywhere. I wanted to choose a team who I don't think is going to be overly relevant, so I figured I would pick Eastern Michigan. So you'll notice here it says encourage transfers, which is exactly what I want to do with Kansas. As you switch back to your original team, as I'm going to do here, you will notice that you don't yet have the opportunity to still encourage transfers on your team. It doesn't show up here yet. So what you're going to have to do is retire your head coach. I wish there was another way to do it because now we're going to be losing Puma Whitlock's XP, his records, his coaching tree, which is unfortunate, but it is going to make things more challenging, which I think is a good thing. So from there, we're going to recreate him. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to click the head coach who's already here and then edit him. That way, we don't have to recreate him every season. I can't change his alma mater, though, so I guess we're going to have a Louisiana pipeline now. Louisiana is an underrated football state, though. They do have a lot of talent down there. But as I said, unfortunately, our coaching records are gone, which kind of sucks. That's why, again, you need to go into the pre-made coach and then edit him as you wish. I guess once we're at the end of this series, I'll try to add up the totals from the first 3 seasons and then going forward. But yeah, as you can see, his XP is gone. He has a lot of the motivator skills, though, which is good. But his recruiting stuff is all gone. It's going to be a lot harder to recruit now. I feel like it's a little easy with all the points we've been adding up. So, again, I think it's kind of a good thing. It adds to the challenge, and then here you go. We can encourage transfers. We have 104 players on the roster currently, but keep in mind, that includes the true freshmen who are coming in, and it also includes the seniors like Caleb Purdy and Travion Ford who are going to be graduating. So that number is not entirely correct. It is a little bit misleading. So we have made it to the players leaving stage. I'm going to go through the guys who we are manually letting transfer in just a bit. But first, we're going to look at the guys who are actually leaving. There's one transferring player here, that being J.J. Addington, and then here are all the seniors. It is worth noting that nobody is declaring for the draft, so Dekias Brinkley will be back for his senior season. That's very exciting. I'm expecting a big year from him to hopefully propel himself into the first or second round conversation. James Livingston, I also thought had a chance to declare, and to be completely honest, after the Michigan game, I kind of wish he did. But he played so badly in that game that his stock obviously took a hit, allowing 4 sacks and playing horribly. I didn't really want him to come back, though. I will be completely honest. I was kind of hoping to see what some of those younger guys could bring us. Because, again, the Michigan game just gave me such a sour taste in my mouth after what was a great season from him, or at least a great regular season. So we do have one player looking to enter the transfer portal on his own merit, that being linebacker J.J. Addington because of playing time. He was a very highly ranked recruit of ours. I think he was probably around 60th overall last year. And I think we're going to let him go. With the transfer portal, I'm going to let the guys go if it makes sense for them. And I don't really see J.J. Addington having a super big role here anytime soon. We've got a lot of good linebackers. He only has normal development. So we're going to let him go. These seniors are also going to be leaving. Some very key guys for us. Damon Greaves, who's been our punter since day one. Amir Herring, who was a starter this year. Was he good in the Michigan game? No, he was completely horrible. So again, I'm not all that sad about that one. I am going to miss these DBs, though. Brian Dilworth had a great year. Caleb Purdy's been our nickel corner since the very first episode. He's been one of the mainstays on this defense, so I'm definitely going to miss these two guys. We're going to have to find a way to replace Travion Ford. I thought he was our best football player this year. 12.5 sacks, 23 TFLs. I think he ends up going in the first round. Spencer Fano had his good moments and his bad moments. Again, I think the 10 sacks allowed are misleading. I'm not sure if he's going to end up getting drafted. Same can be said for the two corners, but those guys are NFL prospects nonetheless. And then Luke Hodge and Dylan Davenport were both depth guys who we added through the portal last year. So only 8 seniors and only 9 players total who are leaving. That's why, again, we're going to be encouraging transfers. I'm going to be encouraging 19 to be specific because I think we're going to add 9 or 10 more players through recruiting and through the transfer portal. So we're going to go down to an even 85, but I'm not doing that right now intentionally, per se. That's just how the numbers all lined up. So my thoughts here is that I have created something called the 3-year plan. If you're entering your 3rd year or later and are good enough to start, but don't really have a clear avenue of starting, we're going to let you go. If you're even younger than that, but a super high recruit who's probably not going to see the field, I'm also going to let you go. We cannot cut the true freshmen who are coming in, but everybody else on the roster is fair game. So we will start at the quarterback position, and we do have someone we will be letting go here. Not Carl Willingham, we can't, but one of these other 4. Specifically, DeAndre Rainbolt. He'll be a redshirt sophomore. He was a fringe 3 to 4-star recruit. Nonetheless, I think he's good enough to where he's going to expect to get playing time at some point, and I don't see it being here. He's going to pass 4 guys on the depth chart. I don't see it happening. So we're going to roll with these 4 quarterbacks for now going into next year. At running back, we've got a deep room of 8, and we're going to be cutting that list in half because we've got so many guys who can play here. Kane McKeithen, I'm going to let go in the transfer portal. He's been here over the last 2 years. The biggest one, in my opinion, of this entire list is Reed Sharp. What a fascinating story it has been following him. Reed Sharp was our 2nd highest ranked recruit last year. I really thought he was our future starting running back. I was really excited about him, but then he flipped his commitment to Minnesota just to come back here. He was behind the 8 ball. He didn't get to go through spring practices, and he got passed up by Cornell Teamer and Ty Lord. Now, what I'm going to do with Reed Sharp is I'm going to do something a little bit different for him. I'm going to up his ratings now because players who go through the transfer portal, they don't progress on their new teams, which is stupid. I'm going to edit everybody else's ratings once they're out of the portal, but since Sharp was such a high recruit, I want big schools or big enough schools going after him now. So when it's all said and done, our supposed franchise running back ended his Kansas career with 4 carries. That's college football for you. Sometimes you win some and you lose some. From there, I'm going to let Harry Stewart III and Johnny Thompson Jr. both enter the portal as well. They're both good veterans. They both had roles for us last year, but as Lord and Teamer got better, their roles diminished. And I would like to see them get a starting job, possibly on a Group 5 team. So there you go. We're down to 4, and I think all 4 of these guys are going to have big roles next year. I'm really excited about the true freshman, Nicholas Scotland-Williamson. He's a power back with 95 speed and a 77 overall. We're also getting our first look at the overall ratings for all these freshmen now, which is pretty cool. Emmanuel Ross, we got him in the portal a couple years ago from Syracuse. We're going to let him go. And then Keaton Kubeka, who's been on the roster since the start. Again, I don't really see a role for him long term. So we're going to go with these 6 receivers for now, but I'm going to be possibly hunting a receiver in the portal, and we've got a few other guys on the board. We're not going to let any of the tight ends go. We only have 3. As for the offensive line, we will be letting a couple of guys enter the portal at guard. Both Alex Ball and Harrison Utley. Both guys are almost 80 overalls, but they are buried behind other good players on our team. And then James Livingston, I will be having enter the transfer portal. We've got some good young guards who I feel like are ready to go. And after Livingston's inconsistencies as a sophomore and then the playoff game against Michigan, I think we would be better off letting him go. Big schools are going to be interested in him. I feel like he's going to be able to land on his feet just fine. But I'm ready to move on. We're not going to let any of the centers go. We will let Cameron Hardrick enter the portal, though, a former JUCO guy. And then at right tackle, I decided to let David Abijan go. I think he's a talented player with some upside, but we've got a lot of young tackles, and I just don't really see a long-term spot for him. At defensive line, we added a lot through recruiting this year, so we're going to let Clay Latruce, a junior who we got out of JUCO last year, he's going to hit the portal. And then at defensive end, we're going to let a couple of rotation guys go. Graydon Grimes and Champ Tompkins, both of whom are good players. Tompkins had 6 sacks last year, playing around 30% of the snaps. With a big role, he could be really good. Graydon Grimes as well. Remember back in Season 1 when he played 1 drive against UNLV and won the National Player of the Week defensively? He's a really talented player, but with all the freshmen we're getting, most notably Alpha G, there's just not going to be a spot for these guys because Seth Jennings and Dekias Brinkley and Devin Murphy and maybe 1 or 2 of these freshmen are going to be ahead of them. They're good enough to start. It's just not going to happen here. At linebacker, J.J. Addington is already transferring. We're going to let Logan Brantley go. He'll be a senior next year. Inside linebacker, Javon Russell and Brian Helena will go. I'm excited about Soma Satele, though. He was our lowest ranked recruit last year. I actually think he's going to be quite good. We're not going to do anything at right outside linebacker. And then at corner, the only guy who we're going to have transfer is Basil Wilson. He started for us as a sophomore, began this year as a starter and really struggled. We benched him for Brian Dilworth. It ended up being a good move, and I don't see us starting him next year. So we're going to be very young in the cornerback room going into next season, which should be interesting to follow. Maybe someone like true freshman Cornell Abreu steps up, or maybe one of the guys who we already have here, like Alfonso Rugamba, Viliame Manupuna, or Teron Jean-Pierre. At safety, I'm going to let Javier Ayan-Badejo transfer, and that's everybody. We're actually down to 84 players. I think I said 85. I got my math wrong. But we're down to 84. We have 8 seniors going. J.J. Addington will also be transferring. So we're going to be down to 75 players, meaning I expect to add 10 through recruiting and the transfer portal. There's a lot of guys we have currently in the portal. I released nearly 20 of them. But again, I think this is in all of their best interests to do. 2 players, Emmanuel Ross and Clay Latruce, had their recruitments open, so I guess we could get them back if we wanted to. James Livingston and Basil Wilson are already down to 5, which makes sense. They're going to be seniors next year. They're 2 of the older guys. What I noticed here is that Reed Sharp is interested in Missouri. That would be fascinating. I kind of assumed it would be Minnesota, who he had committed to at one point last year, but that's not the case. Most of the players there are interested in Group 5 schools, which I think is probably in their best interests, gets them an opportunity to see the field. I went across the country as well looking at other players, specifically quarterbacks, who are going to be good enough to potentially enter the portal as well. Amongst the quarterbacks who I have moved into the portal include Ricky Collins from LSU, who has us on his list. Interesting. We'll have to come back to that one. Chris Parson from Mississippi State, C.J. Carr from Notre Dame with Jay Pitts winning the starting job and winning the national championship. That was an easy one. Sam Leavitt. Isaiah Marshall, after 1 year in Pitt, he'll be going to the portal. Michigan is the favorite for him. Dylan Lonergan from Alabama, Brock Glenn from Florida State, and then Tommy Newman from Georgia. All of these guys, I don't think their teams would plan on starting them next year or would want to start them, but they're all good enough to play somewhere. And then in terms of players who are declaring for the draft, there's a lot of interesting ones. There were some surprises, guys who we didn't expect to declare for the draft. It is worth noting that DJ Lagway is going to stay at Florida. He usually enters the portal in this game, but I'm happy that he decided not to because I think Florida's going to have, at least on paper, the best offense in the country going into next year. They're going to have 10 starters coming back. I will say, though, I think DJ Lagway very well could have been a first-rounder had he declared. Right now, it feels like there's only one clear first-rounder being Dante Moore. So if you're a junior quarterback who's good enough, it might make sense to declare. How about Dylan Raiola? The Nebraska signal caller will be entering the draft, which we did not originally expect. I think he catapults himself up to QB2, but you'll have to find out officially in the upcoming Broncos franchise episode. So he enters the class, but Arch Manning of Texas is going to go back for his senior year. There were a lot of players who changed their minds in terms of entering the draft, specifically more guys who originally did not, who now will be. For pretty much everybody who enters the draft, I'm going to let them go. This game never persuades the draft players to come back. So everyone who's interested in declaring will go, except for players who I think really are not good enough. An interesting example, though, here is with Jeremiah McClellan of Oregon, because he could be the clear number one receiver next year. Jerion Dickey's going to be a top 100 pick. Ryan Pelham is entering the transfer portal. However, McClellan was good enough last year to where I see how he is an NFL prospect. So even though it's not really in his best interest, I'm going to let him enter the draft. There are a couple guys, though, who I'm not going to let enter the draft because I just don't think they would get picked. We'll start with Devin Rivers out of Fresno State. He averaged 4 yards per carry in a group of 5 conference, and he's 5'6". That doesn't scream NFL to me. Jelani Watkins as well, only 500 yards last year at LSU, and he's 160 pounds. Both of these guys are very small, and their production is inconsistent. However, it seems like both of them are looking for fresh starts. So I'm going to put both of them in the transfer portal rather than declaring for the NFL draft, spicing it up a little bit. So those guys now enter the portal with all of our players and all of the quarterbacks. I know this was a lot to go over here, and I'm excited to go over more of the underclassmen who are declaring again in the upcoming episode of the Broncos franchise. There's about 15 or 20 new players who we did not talk about previously. So as we simulate the week, moving into recruiting and the transfer portal, the fun part, Trayvon Lockridge is locked as out. I'll be honest, I have no clue who that is. I think what happened is when we retired the original Puma Whitlock and made the new one, the game put some more players on our recruiting board, including him, as Caleb Purdy ends up getting picked. Obviously, this technically doesn't matter. We'll see where he ends up getting drafted. In the Broncos franchise, Travion Ford, for instance, goes undrafted here, but in the series, he'll probably be a first-round pick. So these are the guys who we still have on the recruiting board, those 7. We have around 20 players committed right now, and then the game put these guys on the board. I don't really want any of them, so I decided to take them all off. From there, we now have 9 open spots. We're not going to fill all 9 of them, but hopefully we can add a couple impact players to the transfer portal. The big names interested in us is Ricky Collins, we already talked about, and then linebacker Roddy Orr from Iowa. We'll go into in a little more depth about Orr in a moment, but he's coming off a really good season, 2 years of eligibility. I'm very excited about him. As for Ricky Collins, he would have been the perfect player for us after, say, season 1, when we needed a veteran quarterback in between Jalen Daniels and then whoever would have been the future. But we have too many quarterbacks on the team. Clyde Poole, Sean Pullard, Kerry Chosen, Carl Willingham. There's just not a spot for Ricky Collins. I don't think he would start for us, and I think it makes more sense for him to go somewhere like Tulane, who lost their really talented quarterback to the portal. Mississippi State lost their starting quarterback to the portal. Someone like them would probably make more sense than us. As I said, though, we are going to add Orr because he looks like a beast. But unfortunately, there's nobody else in the portal who has any interest in us. So much like last year, it doesn't look like we're going to be overly active in the transfer portal, but rather with the few remaining roster spots that we have left, I figure why not look at some high school prospects who have been underlooked and don't have scholarships. We need depth at running back for sure. We only have 4 on the roster, so I'm going to look at Josh Feely, Cordell Conti, probably a linebacker, and then Frederick Hendricks plays quarterback. A little bit ironic because we don't really need one, but we'll talk about him in just a second. We'll start with Roddy Orr, though. We're going to scout him, and he looks legit. He can do everything. He can cover, he can stop the run, he can go after the quarterback, and he's done everything over the last 2 years at Iowa. I'm really excited about the thought of landing him. I don't know where he would play, but I want him. Josh Feely, unfortunately, is a bust. He has 81 speed as a 5'9", 180-pound receiving back. That's not going to do. So I'm going to take him off the board and replace him with running back Rodney Mama instead. He has a cool name, so that's got to go for some points. And as you can see, he looks a lot better. He's a gem. He's also a smaller guy, but he seems more the receiving back mantra. We've recruited a lot of running backs from the South Florida area. Cornell Teamer, Nicholas Scotland-Williamson. Over half of our running back room is going to be from there. Cordell Conti at linebacker looks like a good player. He's athletic. I think he can cover a bit. And then Frederick Hendricks, the quarterback. He seems like a solid player. I would be inclined to see if he's good at any other position. But he's got the size. He's got some athleticism. So we're going to offer all 4 of those guys scholarships. And we've got a lot of recruiting hours to use up. And previously, we could go as high as 70 to 75 recruiting hours per player. But again, since I had to retire the original Puma Whitlock, I can't. Which once again adds to the challenge, which I think is a good thing. I'm not going to use all of my points, though, because for a few of these guys, we're really close to landing them. We have 10 open roster spots, and there's 11 players we're going after. So I want to be flexible and kind of pick and choose who we end up landing. Now, there's a good chance we don't land everybody here. Alabama, for instance, is interested in safety Maurice Waddy. So if he were to commit to Alabama, then we would try to get the other 10 guys. In terms of visits, we are going to use a handful of these in terms of the recruiting battles that I really care about. Roddy Orr, obviously, as I said earlier, I don't really know where he would play, but we're going to find a way to play him if we land him. Maurice Waddy would be one of our highest-ranked recruits at the cycle. He was listed as a bust. He has questionable upside, but I think he's a good player. Ofisa Sammy, we need a punter. And then Eric Magouligan, I think he's the guy who I'm going to prioritize over the rest of the group. He is a gem. I like his ceiling. There are some schools starting to take notice of him, and, well, I don't want them to end up getting him. So we're going to simulate through the first week. Since we're not putting points into the guys who are down to 3 schools, I don't think we're going to land anybody. But we have a few guys narrowing down their list. McBean, Waddy, Sammy, and Magoulihan are all down to 3, and we're in first place for all of them, which is good. As for Roddy Orr, I don't feel so confident. He's coming off a visit with us last week, and Tulsa is still ahead. So I'm a little bit worried that he might end up going there. I thought it would be Notre Dame or Ohio State who could pass us, not Tulsa, per se. As for Maurice Waddy, we do with the lead. Alabama's going after him slowly again, so hopefully that means we can land him. I imagine the Crimson Tide are going to up their pursuits, though. Not much else to talk about this week. We're going to simulate forward once again. Nobody will commit this week, but we've got more guys narrowing their lists down. We are in first for Roddy Orr, which is really good news. And then Mama, Conti, and Hendricks, the guys we just added, are down to 8. So we had a good week for Roddy Orr, passing Tulsa. It's going to be one of us or Notre Dame. Again, I'm really surprised Notre Dame and Ohio State are not looking at him more. He's a really good player. Otherwise, we're not going to change our strategy in terms of recruiting in the transfer portal here for week 3 as we simulate the week, hoping for good news, and we're going to get some. Roddy Orr, the 4-star transfer linebacker, has committed to Kansas. He has 2 more years of eligibility and is a really fascinating player in my opinion. 6'2", 220. He can cover. He can go after the quarterback. He's a solid athlete. He's coming off a season last year with Iowa where he had 10.5 sacks. Iowa's used him in a lot of different ways, and given his success as a pass rusher last year, I want to see him going after the quarterback. We might have him bulk up, move to defensive end possibly. And then Maurice Waddy has committed as well. I think he's going to be our 2nd or 3rd highest ranked recruit of this entire cycle. His recruitment was a lot slower than other top prospects because it seems like teams have questions about his upside, but I think he's talented enough to compete for a role. And then Offseason Sammy will hopefully be our punter for the next 4 years, while safety Eric McGoulahan has also committed. So we land 4 players in this cycle, and we have a few other guys continuing to narrow down their list as we make it into the final week. So Roddy Orr and Maurice Waddy were really the 2 competitive battles that I wanted to keep my eye on. We end up landing both of them, which is good news because they were my top 2 priorities. But now we have 7 guys left on the board, and we have 6 roster spots. Theoretically, we could get all 7 if we wanted to and cut somebody else. But there's nobody on the roster currently I want to get rid of. So we're going to take Cordell Conte off the board. I like him a lot, but the way I see it is I actually think there's a lot of similarities between his game and Roddy Orr's, who we already just landed. The other team in the mix for Conte is Iowa. So I think him going there would probably be the best thing for his future. He probably won't play a lot this year, but I think he could be quite good down the line. Everybody else, meanwhile, we're going to get the maximum amount of points to. We're hoping to land all of them, and we're going to use up 4 of our visits because we can only use 4 visits at a time. So I'm going to go after the 4 guys who I think we have the least likely shot of getting, but I think chances are we're going to land all of these guys, adding some more depth to the roster, and hopefully a couple of these guys end up turning into strong starters for us down the line. So Cornelius and McBean will not visit. They're going to come to our campus cold turkey. They will have never seen it before, and, well, hopefully they like it enough. We have the 6th ranked recruiting class as we get set to simulate the week. Edward Brzezinski, the tight end, has committed from Kernsville, South Carolina. He's more of a blocking tight end. I don't see him being a long-term starter, but a good depth guy. Pierre Wilbon from Chicago has also committed. The other 4 players are not here. That's just because they haven't entirely narrowed their list down, but since we are the highest ranked school for them, and this is the final stage, they will all be committing. So we land everybody else who's on the board, a 29-player class, which will finish with the number 6 ranking in the country. I was hoping for a top 5 class. We got one last year, but doesn't happen. Nonetheless, still a really good group. We have 1 transfer and 28 freshmen, including 6 top 100 freshman prospects. We finished with 1 5-star. We had 18 4-star freshmen, I believe. Maybe it was 19. I don't remember the exact number. And then we added some 3-stars here towards the end. 24 stars, including the transfer, Roddy Orr. Let's look at the development traits for our new players. Rodney Mama has impact. Hendricks has normal. Cornelius has impact. Brzezinski is normal. McBean has normal. And Pierre Wilbon has impact. McGoulahan has impact. Sammy has normal. Waddy has normal. I kind of feared that would be the case. And then Roddy Orr has impact. So none of these guys have anything higher than impact, but again, a few possibly good players down the road. Let's see where all of our guys ended up transferring. We'll start at the quarterback position. DeAndre Rainbolt will go to UNLV. I think he's got a chance to start there, not this season, but the following year. I'm excited for him to get probably 2 years as a starter in the Mountain West. CJ Carr will compete for the job at Michigan. I felt like the Wolverines were an obvious transfer spot for some of these quarterbacks, and as you'll see, they ended up landing 2. Ricky Collins will be the starter at Tulane. Brock Glenn is going to Miami, so they go back to the portal. Keon Hokulani may never get his chance to start. Poor guy. Sam Levitt will compete for the starting job at Oregon with Austin Mack and some younger guys. Dylan Lonergan will go to Georgia Tech. Isaiah Marshall returns home to Michigan. He will compete with CJ Carr to be the starter for the Wolverines. Tommy Newman to Michigan State. This is the one that I feel like doesn't really make sense. The Spartans have a pretty good young quarterback who I think is better than Tommy Newman. And then Chris Parson is going to Wake Forest. As for the guys already on the board, J.J. Cole will replace Dylan Raiola at Nebraska. Iowa State will have a quarterback who I believe is a 69 overall as their starter this year. Yikes. Cole Welliver will look to be the heir apparent once Arch Manning leaves. Henry Hasselback stays in town from UCLA to USC. He'll look to be the heir apparent, assuming Sam Onatulu declares for the draft this year. And then probably the other interesting ones were Gordon Pleslusny going to Alabama. He had a really good freshman year at Tulane. Max Westbrook was a 5-star at Virginia, leaves after just 1 year. He would have been the starter this season, but he decided to go to NC State. And then Noah Lugo, who was BYU's starter last year, he will be going to Washington State. At the running back position, Kane McKeithen will go to Rice. He had interest in Rice when he was a high school prospect, so that makes a lot of sense. Devin Rivers is going to go to UConn. It feels like a weird landing spot, but the Huskies did develop Darrell Robinson, who is the number 1 player in the portal, going to Michigan. So Rivers is going to go to an offense that has developed good running backs in the past. Reed Sharp is headed to Missouri. Wow. So Reed Sharp is now going to become one of this series' antagonists, if you will. And he's got a chance to be a really good player for our arch rival as this series goes along. I don't think he's going to play a ton this year, but probably as soon as his sophomore season, I could see him having a big role. One of my favorite storylines of the portal is that Harry Stewart and Johnny Thompson will remain teammates. They will be the 1-2 punch at James Madison. The Dukes only won one game last year. They're hoping those two can help rebuild their rushing attack. Darrell Robinson, the top player in the portal, goes to Michigan. The last time the Wolverines landed a portal running back, it was Darius Taylor. Ended up working out pretty well. Robinson is going to have 590-plus offensive line blocking for him. He is going to eat in that offense. At wide receiver, Keaton Kubeka is also going to James Madison. The JMU Jayhawks, if you will. Emmanuel Ross to Virginia. Jelani Watkins to Ohio State. That's a good spot for him. Ryan Pelham to USC. The Trojans are losing a lot of receivers, so that makes sense that they're going to go after some guys in the portal. Deuce Alexander to Auburn. He will join forces with Perry Thompson, the projected first-rounder who decided to stay in school. JoJo Phillips also goes to USC, while Darian Zipperer will be the number one receiver at Clemson. David Abijan will go to UNLV. We have a couple guys ending up there. Mark Schroller will go to Oregon. Lucas Simmons will go to Army, a top 10 player in the portal. That is an interesting spot. Alex Ball to Southern Miss. Cameron Hardrick to Louisville. Harrison Utley will go to Georgia Southern. And then James Livingston is headed to Michigan. That damn traitor. He was a double agent. That's why he allowed 4 sacks against Michigan, because he was working for them the whole time. If you can't beat them, join them, I guess. The top center did not end up going anywhere. That's interesting. Graydon Grimes to Texas A&M. I think he's good enough to play in the SEC. In his limited reps, he has been quite good. And then Champ Tompkins to UNLV. I'm surprised no big schools really went after him. I think he's a power conference level player. Again, he had 6 sacks this year, getting like a third of the snaps. Clay Latruse is a traitor. He is headed to Kansas State. Stefilian Green, one of the better players throughout the college football playoff, goes from Clemson to Tennessee. Francis Brew with a backyard swap from Pitt to West Virginia. At linebacker, Logan Brantley goes to Cal. I didn't scroll far enough, but J.J. Addington is going to BYU, a school who he was originally interested in, and he's from Utah, so it makes sense. Brian Helena and Javon Russell will team up at James Madison. Peyton Pierce to LSU, the second-ranked overall player in the portal. Basil Wilson is headed to Oklahoma. It seems like he wanted to go to a big school, play in the SEC. Is he good enough? I don't know. Ashton Stamps to Texas A&M. Quentin Taylor to Florida. The Gators lost a lot in the secondary. That's a big get for them, shoring up their defense, because as we know, their offense is already really solid. Missouri loses Trajan Greco, one of the better players on their defense. He is headed over to Duke. And then at safety, Javier Ayan-Badejo is headed to UCLA. UCF loses both of their really good safeties. Jalen Hayward, the 8th-ranked player in the portal, he is headed to Florida. Adrian Wilson, the son of former NFL safety Adrian Wilson, is headed to Texas Tech. And then the other really good UCF safety, Jashad Presley, is headed to Ohio State. A lot of losses for the Knights. If they wanted to make a run, I think last year was their best opportunity. We'll see if they can reload, losing a lot of pieces on both sides of the ball, including quarterback Ja'Cory Brown, who could end up being a first-rounder despite his bad college football playoff performance. We've now made it to position changes. It feels weird seeing everybody with their new years. Guys like Damani Maxon and Dekias Brinkley, the very few day one players left who started as freshmen, are now seniors. They're now the old guys. We have 2 athletes who we had signed with the program, both of whom were quarterbacks, and we're going to let Carl Willingham develop as a quarterback. I think he's got a shot to be a really good power conference starter. Will it be here? We'll see, but I like his upside a lot. As for Frederick Hendricks, I just don't really think there's another position he's fit for. I guess we're going to have 5 quarterbacks on the roster. Hell, maybe he ends up being the long-term guy. That would be a little bit funny. I could see our future starter being any of the quarterbacks except him, but hey, you never know. Mike Jefferson, we're going to slide over to guard. Carter Leversky, I think, has a better fit at guard. This is banking on one of our young tackles to take a big step in development, though, this offseason, whether that's Reggie Chanel, who has star development. Kenyon Denbo has star. Nicholas Perkins has star. Sam Willihan has star. We need one of those guys to take a big leap to potentially start at left tackle. with Calvin Clement starting at right tackle. We're going to move a couple guys from right end to left end just to even things out. Devin Murphy and Sam Banovich. So now that's a little bit more evened out. We're going to do the same at linebacker. Devontae Crispin will slide from right outside over to left. Jason McBean will join him. We have a plethora of left outside linebackers now, but my thought is that we're going to move Leon Ibrahim inside. He would be a really good safety, which does not surprise me. He has a safety skill set and would certainly be an interesting player there at 240 pounds. So most of the guys whose positions we switch, we just made minor tweaks, but we are actually going to move one player's entire position around. Dakota Cornelius is only a 62. I was hoping he'd be a little better, but he's a 67 at running back, and I think his skill set is a little bit better fit there. So Cornelius, who we recruited as a receiver, will move over to running back. So those are our position changes. Now it's time to simulate to the next phase of the offseason, which is player progression, one of my favorite parts of the offseason. The big questions include who's going to be the next Mo Nwokeji in the sense of a surprising player taking a big leap. Do any of the quarterbacks pass Clyde Poole in rating? The original coach, who we added into Puma Whitlock, has the offseason training boost for every position group except for running back and linebacker. We had 10 recruiting points to spend. We could only pick one position. I ended up choosing running back. I think a lot of the young linebackers on the team with good development traits have a chance to go up anyway. And if someone like Ty Lord or Cornell Teamer or if Jazir Tolbert takes a big leap in rating, that would be huge for the offense. So here we go into training results. We are an 89 overall. Hello! 4 players in the 90s. Clyde Poole apparently went up. I don't know how he did, but he's an 84. He's still the highest rated quarterback on the team, although Sean Pullard had a good offseason. He's an 82, while Kerry Chosen does not see much movement. So Sean Pullard looks to be knocking on the door of the starting spot. Cornell Teamer, as I said, I was hoping one of these guys takes a big leap. He's an 87. I think Ty Lord was a little better last year, but does this mean Cornell Teamer is the number 1 back? Mario Maddox, an 87. Wow. Law and Jones both with nice leaps. They are into the 80s. Pierre Johnson is the highest rated tight end. Both him and Jaden Ham had great off seasons. I think Isaiah Lamore will still be the starter, though, because Pierre Johnson is more of a blocking tight end. I think he'll be really good in 12 personnel sets. I think he'd be a really good fullback. But we need a receiver at the tight end position. Unfortunately, I think Isaiah Lamore has kind of peaked with his rating. In terms of the tackles, Perkins is a 78, Denbo's a 78, and Reggie Chanel is a 79. So none of the tackles who I was hoping for a big leap ended up taking one, but they all went up a little bit. Carlo Leversky is an 87, while Kyon Sample's an 85, so maybe we need to have both of those guys start. Terrell Butts is an 85. That's a big leap, while Benji Trahan is an 84. I'm excited about the offensive line next year. We're going to have, I think, 3 new starters, but we've got some good players there. Seth Jennings is a 91. He will certainly be good enough to declare for the NFL draft after this year. He's got to play like an NFL player, though. Devin Murphy's an 84. That is a huge leap, especially after the great season he had last year. Ben Bieria and Kerry Folk also with big leaps up. This defensive line is going to be unbelievably good this year. Dakaius Brinkley, 92. We have so many good rotational edge rushers, and this doesn't even account for the 6 guys we have coming in as freshmen. Samuel Mpemba's a 90. Devontae Crispin an 86. Mo Nwokeji a 90. Soma Satele takes a big leap. Stokes and Herrera take big leaps. I told you guys the linebackers were still going to go up. In the secondary, we didn't have as much luck, but Todd and Landers go up quite a bit. Teron Jean-Pierre and Viliami Manupuna both had very nice off seasons. And then at safety, not really much changes here. Brandon Hines went up a few, and then the big one is J.P. Hussein, who goes up like 6 or 7. He is now a 76. Along with a couple of good freshmen we're adding with Cordell Hurley and Maurice Waddy. We're going to have another interesting battle in terms of who gets the safety playing time. So overall, I think player progression went pretty well. We are an 89 overall. We have 4 90s on the roster. The highest rated player across the country is a blocking tight end from Army. Who would have thought? Jamari Johnson, though, is a 98 overall. Arch Manning is the highest rated quarterback in the country. I upped the XP sliders at every position, and I was able to notice some differences. There's more highly rated players across the country, but not at quarterback. So it could be another weak QB class, but I would certainly look at Manning and Julian Sain as potential high picks. Luke Cromanhook will start after missing last year. Isaac Wilson of Utah took a big leap. And then, of course, Jay Pitts and Sam Onatulu, the standout freshmen. Pitts did not really get much better, which I didn't really think he would. DJ Lagway also does not go up. That's a little more disappointing. Corin LaRoque in 86. I feel like he's the wild card for this QB class. Peyton Lewis of Tennessee is the top running back. Joe Jackson of Kansas State with a nice offseason. Nitro Tuggle is the best wide receiver. The best duo, though, is a pair of 5'10 slot receivers from Alabama. Cole Adams and sophomore Jackson Pressey. Cortez Boyd is a 91. I think he's going to be a first-rounder, 6'5", blazing fast. Perry Thompson is probably the favorite to be wide receiver 1. He could have been this year. Ryan Wingo's a guy to watch out for. Nick Marsh, third in receiving yards last season. At tight end, Army actually has 2 really good players. Dakota Toll is a 90. Look at Army with these blocking tight ends. On the offensive line, a number of guys in the 90s. As I mentioned, Michigan is going to have 5 players in the 90s, including James Livingston. Landon Marceline out of Arizona State is a 97 out of nowhere. Coleman Vivian, meanwhile, a 92. I think he's got a chance to be a top 10 pick, which as a center is absurd. But yeah, this Michigan offensive line is loaded. Blake Frazier, 93. Gage Robinson, the second best right tackle, 92. Darrell Robinson and whoever wins the quarterback battle, they are not going to be touched within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. Seth Jennings is the third highest rated left end, while Dekias Brinkley is the number 1 right end. This pass rushing tandem is going to be a whole lot of fun. We might not miss Travion Ford as much as we thought. A lot of talent at defensive tackle. As for linebacker, LSU's got a few really good players. I am very excited about this young man, Singleton. 95 speed, 99 acceleration, 99 agility. I think he's going to be a monster. Jair Johnson from Alabama. He's going to miss part of the year with an injury, but he looks really good. Kinston Viliamu Asa from Notre Dame had a great playoff run. He's going to be a high pick. Illinois' got a couple of really good linebackers. And then in the secondary, Earl Culp, Beasley from Tennessee. Those guys are names to watch. The duo from Miami, Robert Stafford and Brendan Hilleman, are going to be really good. And then I think the safety crop is going to be a little weak, but we've had really good safety draft classes in all 3 seasons of the Broncos franchise, so that's not entirely a surprise. From there, we will make it to the final parts of the offseason, that including encouraging players to transfer and custom conferences. We'll start with encouraging transfers, and since Smarty Pants over here did the math correctly, we have 85 players on the roster, and we don't have to cut anybody, which is perfect. So this is the 85 we'll be rocking with for this year. Let's get to the fun part, though, custom conferences, because I have hinted at making big moves, especially with the Big 12, and I think this is the year. We have kept the same Big 12 for the first 3 seasons. Now it's time to shake things up a little bit, and I think our league-wide shakeup is going to start in the SEC, because this conference is kind of pissed off. The SEC views themselves as the best. However, that has not been the case at all in this series, because if we look at our 3 national champions, they all come from the Big Ten. The SEC has been significantly worse than the Big Ten in this series, and because of that, they feel like they've got to make some changes with the group they currently have. Remember, Michigan won it in year 1, Oregon won it in year 2, Notre Dame won it last year, and then Michigan won it the season before this series started. So that's 4 consecutive champions from the Big Ten. If we look at the SEC's past success in the playoffs, Texas and Georgia made runs in year number 1. A&M made the national championship in season 2, but last year the SEC was an embarrassment. Their only 2 playoff teams were Florida and Oklahoma, and neither of them made it out of the first round. Of the final 8 teams left, none of them were in the SEC. This conference is not going to tolerate mediocrity. So because of that, the SEC has derived a multiple-step plan that will likely take place over multiple seasons. Their goal is to try to poach some of the top programs in the ACC, like Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina. And the ACC is going through a transition period anyway. I'm trying to combine the current ACC with the old Big East feeling. So the ACC recognizes that they may be losing some schools in order for the SEC to catch up to the Big Ten. However, the Big Ten will actually be stealing someone from the SEC. Vanderbilt. The SEC does not want Vanderbilt. They do not want these weak links anymore. The Big Ten will be happy to take them, though, because the Big Ten cares way more about academics than the SEC does. And Vanderbilt is obviously a very good academic school. The SEC is not done, though. Arkansas is coming off a 2-10 season. Their program has a lot of question marks. They don't want them. Our conference will happily take them, though, because I think Arkansas is a pretty good program overall. Former 5-star quarterback Malik Page will be the starter this year, so Arkansas will be joining the Big 12. The SEC has lost 2 schools. Who's going to take their places? Well, they wanted Clemson and Florida State and Miami, but those schools are all unsure about the current state of the SEC. So maybe one of those programs will join their conference, but it won't be this year. The SEC has to start small. They're going to start with the Big 12. They want as many Texas schools as possible and would find an agreement with Texas Tech. The Red Raiders are coming off a down season, but they have really developed talent at a high level over the last couple of years. They have been towards the top of the Big 12 in terms of NFL talent over the last decade. It's just a matter of getting good teams together. In the ACC, they couldn't yet pitch Clemson or Florida State or Miami, but they would steal away North Carolina. The Tar Heels didn't love the idea of leaving their rival Duke, but they get to join their other rival, South Carolina. So UNC will be joining the SEC. The Tar Heels did not have a great season last year, but this has Bill Belichick's fingerprints all over it. You know that he is pitching these guys in recruitment that the pathway to being a good player in the NFL is to be coached by him, playing SEC talent. It makes a lot of sense. So North Carolina and Texas Tech are going to the SEC. They're replacing a 2-win and 4-win team with a 3 and 4-win school. But again, the SEC has a bigger plan behind all of this. As I mentioned, though, we are also trying to poach one of Clemson or Miami or Florida State. And believe it or not, we would take one. The Florida State Seminoles are headed to the Big 12. Our conference lands a huge fish. The reason why Florida State did not want to go to the SEC is, as I mentioned, the SEC does not look stable right now. The Big 12 is. And Florida State's thought process behind this is they are not going to be one of the big fish in the SEC. They're going to be behind the Alabamas and the Georgias and the Texases of the world. But in the Big 12, they are the number 1 football brand here. They will always be in the mix to win the Big 12 and make the college football playoff. The ACC will be stealing someone from our conference, though. As I mentioned, I want to bring that Big East feel back, and they're going to bring in West Virginia, who shares a conference now with their rival Pitt. So as you can see, the Big East influence is coming, like Pitt, Syracuse, West Virginia. I wouldn't be surprised to see the ACC try to pry away Notre Dame or even Penn State. I'm also going to be moving NIU to the Mountain West, since that will be happening in real life for God knows what reason. But overall, I feel like this worked out for everyone. The SEC gets to get their big master plan started. They add UNC and Texas Tech. The ACC loses 2 of their top brands with Florida State and North Carolina State, but they add West Virginia, and as I mentioned, they're trying to get this Big East feel while holding on to Clemson and Miami, who are going to sit atop the ACC. That would be their reason to stick around, because they're consistently going to be at the top over there. And then as for the Big 12, we add Arkansas, who I think is a better program than Texas Tech and West Virginia. And then Florida State is always going to be in the mix for the conference title now. They are the second highest rated team in the conference right now, only behind us. So that brings us to the preseason, where we will start the season ranked 9th, which, considering we have most of our core returning from last year, I think that's a pretty accurate ranking. Not to say we're going to be the 9th best team in the country. I mean, maybe we are. Hopefully. As for the schedule, I have not finalized the non-conference teams. I'd love to hear who you guys want to see down below. I have some ideas in terms of a Group 5 opponent and then Power 5 teams. I don't think we're going to schedule Missouri this year, but we certainly will in the future. Missouri might even be in our conference in the future. Hint, hint. This is what our Big 12 schedule looks like. We will play both Arkansas and Florida State, which I'm really excited about. Florida State's going to be late in the year, and then we're traveling to Arkansas to face off against the Razorbacks. Before we wrap up today's video, we have some news about the roster, and it's not good news. Remember towards the end of last year in the Iowa State game, when Mario Maddox tore his pectoral? Well, despite his big offseason where he went up a lot in rating, his pectoral injury has not healed, and he is going to be out for most of the rest of the year. That sucks, because I was expecting a huge season from him after such a great offseason. I thought he'd be in line for 800, 900, maybe even 1,000 yards. But we're not going to have him until right at the end of this season. And since he's a redshirt senior, it's not like we can redshirt him. This is his last year of eligibility, which really sucks. And now we have a major question mark at the wide receiver position. We were expecting Mario Maddox to be healthy and be a starter again, but now he's not, and we're going to have to figure that out early in the season. Next episode will be our season opener. Who will it be against? I don't know at this point. You guys are going to have to find out then. But again, let me know some teams you'd potentially want to see us play against down below in the comments. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Rock Chalk.